Hello, and thank you for joining Igniting Employee Engagement, Leadership, and Governance Strategies for a Thriving Workforce. I'm so excited to be hosting this live stream episode of Diversity Beyond the Checkbox podcast. Named in the top 100 management podcasts in the world, I'm joined by two former guests of the show that have contributed to its recognition for global thought leadership. Let me introduce them. Sunaina Sinha is the global head of private capital equity at Raymond James. She was named one of the top 50 most influential people in private equity by Dow Jones Private Equity News for 2 consecutive years and one of the 20 trailblazing women in private equity in 2023. Sunaina is an investor and serves as chairman of the board of directors of SFC Energy AG, a publicly listed clean energy business. She serves as chairman of the board of Mindful Chef, that was sold to Nestle, and chairman of the board of Barracor, sold to United Fitness Brands. Sunaina serves on the board of the Stanford Institution for Economic Policy Research and the Stanford Lead Council as the trustee of the Stanford UK Foundation. Sunaina is a regular contributor on the financial markets and private equity on CNBC, Bloomberg, BBC, and is often quoted in the media on financial markets and private equity. And Joe Davis, managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. Joe serves as chair of BCG's Center for Inclusion and Equity, where he oversees partnerships with organizations to help build inclusive cultures, deliver social impact, create business value, and drive systemic change. Joe launched BCG's Racial Equity Task Force in 2020, which has been instrumental in their advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, Joe was a founding member of the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion and has served on its steering committee since its inception in 2017. Joe has been with BCG for 34 years. During that time, he co-founded and led multiple offices and practices until his appointment as regional chair of BCG North America, where he was responsible for the firm's operations in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and served on BCG's operating and executive committees. Wow. Sunaina and Joe, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Thank you for having us and for reading all of that out. Oh my
goodness. Thank you very much. You didn't do the condensed version, Jackie.
Yeah, I did not. The reason is because you all have such amazing experience. And I really just wanted the folks on the call to know how accomplished you are and how much we're about to get from this amazing session. So let's jump into it. Employee engagement has been part of leadership vocabulary for more than 3 decades. Research-centered organizations have shared studies confirming that lack of employee engagement has severe effects on the bottom line of your business. We're hearing terms like quiet quitting, quiet vacationing, and we're aware of the struggle in retaining talented employees. But it's been less clear how employee engagement is defined exactly and what it takes to grow engagement within organizations. So I'll start with this question for both of you. How would you each define employee engagement, and why do you believe it plays such a crucial role in driving organizational success? Joe, would you like to start?
Okay. Of course, we could define that a lot of ways all day long. I guess for me, what I would say is if people are engaged, they are truly feeling connected to the organization, both personally and deeply, not just like a job and a paycheck. And by that, I mean its purpose. It was interesting. I was on a college campus recently and talking about someone at a summer job. And I said, I really like the company's purpose. We always hear they say that in research, but I actually had a kid say it to me. I thought, oh, that's impressive. The goals, and then, of course, the values. And I think, importantly, leadership. If you just see leadership as this distant thing and not as a human thing, a human person who's trying to connect to you and your humanity, I think it's tough. The other thing I'll just say quickly is, I also think, of course, you have to be connected to one's colleagues. You can't just be a cog in an organization wheel. And then finally, I think when people feel most connected, they actually are, seen. People ask questions of them and people listen to them. And I'll just cite very quickly, Google did a study. They talked to 80,000 or looked at 80,000 of their managers. Shows how big Google is. And they said the best managers, the top thing is they coached well. How they coach well, they engage with their people. And how they do that, they ask questions and they listen. They ask questions and they listened. So I think that's quite important part of really being engaged.
Yeah.
That's information, Joe. Sunaina?
Agree with all of that. I think that there is this movement over the last couple of generations of people entering the workforce towards greater connection and greater empathy, right? No one wants to feel, and it's no longer good enough to feel that I get a paycheck here and I leave here and that's all I'm getting. Okay? People want to feel, it's back to that, those wonderful words that we all say, but it truly matters to feel meaning, to feel connection. And people are striving for that, not just in other parts of their lives, but in the workplace. And companies that can show empathy and connect and build connection and talk about the human things that matter to people are the ones that end up winning in this new generation, in this new paradigm. So I think that for me is engagement. It's all about authentic connections and in a very real way, making your employees feel that they are being heard, that there is a connection between employer and employee, but within the guardrails of the limitations of how much you can adopt of what you're hearing. But at least you're being heard and you're being seen. You're no longer just a number. There's no such thing as lifetime employment anymore, right? Despite all of the increase in interest rates, you still have a very tight labor market, which means companies have to do whatever they can to retain talent, but especially their top talent.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the issues, right, one of the challenges is that for so many of us Gen Xers, right, that's not how we learn to work, right? Because that's not what we saw modeled as leadership. And so this is new, this is emerging, evolving. And so we're going to have to make those shifts as leaders. And from your experience leading at BCG and Raymond James, what are the most effective strategies that leaders can implement to foster a highly motivated and engaged workforce and retain top talent? Sunaina, we'll start with you on this one.
For me, the strategy that has been the most effective is to identify the values in your culture that you want to hold people by, that you are happy to live with, and code that into how the business is measured and how people are measured, right? I have a 2x2 that I put up as many times a year as I can, and it's certainly put up at year-end reviews, where we measure people by the performance KPIs and outcomes that we care about, right? In finance, those can often be measured by dollars, but in different industries, it's different outcomes that you're measuring. And that's the y-axis. But the x-axis is culture. It's a set of values that we want people to live by, and that will also be measured. So you'll be plotted on this 2x2, low, high on performance, low, high on culture and values. And that's how top talent will be identified, and that's how top talent will be remunerated. And it's important to live by those values yourself as a leader and as a business, but also expect that of your people and ensure that you're self-selecting a group of people who believe in those values. And they have input into what those values are and what determines best practices according to that. But that has been a very salient way that you've got to talk the talk, walk the walk, and live by it day by day. It's not just something you put up and say, oh, I'll do a town hall once a quarter and that'll check that engagement box. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. It has to be part of your daily showing up as people in the workplace.
Sunaina, that's so true. And, one of the things that you said was checking a box. And I think that employees can feel when those leaders are simply checking a box versus fostering those authentic connections. It's important to have a relationship with your employees that feel real, that feel valuable to you and to them. And it's also important to check in with them, not only on how they're doing in their job, in those tasks, but how they're doing personally, because it all interplays in how engaged and how well they're doing, how productive they are in their job. Joe, what would you add?
Ad's just going to be maybe embellished because Sunita just said it all. I do think, it's actually interesting listening to you and thinking of some of the things BCG even does. Our highest rewarded and most respected officers are, of course, highly commercial, but they also have the highest upward feedback. We have this matrix and the North Star, and we have 360 feedback. Upward feedback is anonymous. The best have high upward feedback and high commercial. And if you actually don't have good upward feedback 3 years in a row, it's a little rocky for you. Which, to your point about metrics, I mean, we can all talk it, and we do all talk it, but actually putting it where it matters can make a big difference. I think the other thing, just it's important, we talk about connecting, but also you need to connect in a way that they hear you. And I'll tell a little story. Joaquin Duato, CEO of J&J, likes to use this thing called friend testing and group testing. If he's going to do a town hall, as you said, he wants to make sure they hear the words he's saying, not just that he's saying the words. And he'll ask, he said when he first got the job, he asked a friend, hey, what are people saying I'm saying out there? He said, well, sir, you want to cut costs. So I never said that. I said, I want to simplify this complicated matrix so we can all be more effective. Oh yeah, that's what you said. You want to cut costs. So it was stunning to him. So it's not just connecting or speaking to or town hall with just to add to saying that with the team, but also actually make sure your messages are landing in ways that they actually hear them, not the way you think you're saying them.
Joe, that's such an important point. And communication is integral to successful business in any part of that business. I really like that you said, what are people saying that I'm saying? Right? Yeah. Because that's an amazing question, because it's not necessarily what you think you're communicating. How is that being received? Right. And so that is so important. I think that's a valuable takeaway for us as leaders. What are people saying that I'm saying? Thank you for sharing that. Those points are so great, so great. As BCG has a focus on understanding the future of work, what trends do you foresee shaping employee engagement strategies in the next 5 to 10 years, Joe?
Okay. Now, this one I did actually cheat and go talk to some BCG experts on this topic in our organization practice, and it's actually interesting. Of course, I had a boss or a leader who always said, Joe, what are you doing talking about the future too much? Nobody really knows the future, but let's still speculate a bit. Or even if you look today, this session has the word engagement on it, which is critical. But I was talking to some of my colleagues, and one of the women who's deepest in the topic, she says, Joe, engagement's essential, but joy is critical, which is a little bit what you were saying. So, people, and by that I mean people find their work interesting, rewarding, fun, whatever word you want. It's not just a rote thing. I'll tell you a story. BCG did most of the work. Well, we did it with Treasury and some banks, the auto bailout, Obama's auto bailout, but anything's written, I think we wrote. That team is interesting. I talked to the leader of that team on a Sunday afternoon. I said, what are you calling me on Sunday? So we just got off. So what do you mean just got off? He said, well, Joe, we work 16 hours a day and 8 hours on Saturday and 7 hours, 5 hours on Sunday. I said, holy moly, how come no one's complaining to me? I was running the Northeast system, but everybody was loving what they were doing. So you work that much, and you could tell the president of the United States close GM or not. So that's a pretty cool project, But it just shows that if people feel really engaged, not engaged, if they feel like they have to be engaged too, but actually value in their work, enjoy their work, etc. And we did some work that I think it was 11,000 people around the world. Those who said they found joy in their work are 50% less likely to leave. Both of you have mentioned the importance of retention. And if you think about companies, this woman said to me, Joe, we have radical customer service focus, which is critical. But what about radical employee focus? And how are they really feeling? What are they, et cetera, et cetera. I think Costco actually does think that way. She gave me this example. And their retention or their attrition 7%, and 7% in retail is unheard of.
Right.
So I think this is probably today, and it ties to what you both said about how people need to feel connected to their work and engage and feel human. But the joy aspect is probably going to be more and more critical. And we all know it, but do we really focus on it as leaders as much as we should? I mean, of course, you say, I like my job, but are you really thinking about that as hard as you might?
Joe, I love that. Joy in your work is not something we hear.
No, I never heard it before either.
The workplace. And so, how do we begin to foster that for our teams? I think that that's so important. There are studies that say that happy employees in the workplace are 13% more productive. And that is significant. That's about an hour a day of more productive work when you have that joy. And so that's so important, because more productivity with no overhead is more profitability. So I love that.
And when people are happier working, that's a winning thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sunaina, how can governance structures support or hinder employee engagement? And what steps can companies take to align their governance with employee motivation and well-being?
So there's lots of different governance models out there, right? And we're not here to say this one's better or that one's worse. Eventually, they all fall into some kind of hierarchy, and all types of hierarchy have managers. I think the most important thing companies can focus on is management talent. Are you a good manager? How many industries do Joe and I know, right? Where if you're a really good producer, you are now in charge of people without any account for whether you know how to work with people, manage people, care for people or not. It's not often a metric to whether someone's promoted or not, and it absolutely should be. And leadership and management are two very different things, right? A great leader does not need to be necessarily a great manager of the rank and file folks, okay? But you absolutely need good management in whatever your governance structure. So my call to action for companies is to focus on that management cohort, because all of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of engagement, well-being, joy, empathy, real connection, authenticity, that's only a person capable of someone who is able to deliver that on behalf of your company. So who are those people? And there's some wonderful case studies out there as to how companies do train up their management cohort to manage in a way that aligns with values and not necessarily focus on the top producers always being in management and leadership positions. I think that's the first call to action. Then below that is, okay, how do you arm these people with the tools to then use in an effective way with the people that they're managing, especially the newer generation that's coming into the workforce? And that's where I think a greatly underutilized toolkit is coaching, right? I think more and more people are using coaching, but it's often on their own dimes. And it's often because you've done something wrong. You've fallen off the guardrails. You've gone off the other side of the path. And then the company's saying, all right, and I'm guilty of this too. That's when I then introduce coaching, say, hey, you'll benefit from a coach. Now go get some coaching. Why not think about it proactively? Nobody's born a manager. No one's born how to lead. Very few people are born to lead. Let's put it that way. It's often a muscle you build over years and decades. So how about we get in front of this? And if we have someone in a management seat taking care of large cohorts of people, you get in front of that and offer them the help they need to think about what are the good ways of managing and leading in this day and age and what are not so good ways. So those would be some of the things I would offer. It's not about whether you're a matrix model or a line management model, or what does your governance chart look like. It's about the people who then have to then, on your behalf, on your company's behalf, go ahead and deliver that management muscle to people.
Sunaina, that's so right. And, when you started your answer, you said people are promoted based on being excellent individual contributors, right? But there's not a pull aside that says, okay, let me teach you how to lead people. And I think that's a significant miss, right? Because being an excellent individual contributor doesn't always translate to being a good leader or a good manager. And so, as organizational leaders, how do we begin to create those professional development opportunities for our emerging leaders, emerging managers, to train them early on as they're moving into those roles? Because it's not just, this is what I'm responsible for. You're now responsible for other folks' work, other folks' feeling of well-being in the workplace. And so, how do you begin to train those emerging leaders to be good managers and good leaders of people? And I think that's so important.
I'll add very quickly, Jackie, because it's so important. You as a manager, I feel as a manager, I am responsible for a number of people's human journeys, their lives that they spend with us. That's a huge responsibility and a privilege. And you better deliver that as your best self. If you think about it, we spend most of our waking hours in the workplace, and most of our lives working. So therefore, most of your human journey is spent in this structure, right? With a manager. If you are that manager, I feel it's a huge responsibility for me to show up as the best possible version of that role I can, because I'm responsible for their human journey with me.
Yes. I love that, Sunaina. Thank you for sharing that. That's so important. In the current landscape of remote and hybrid work models, and this question will be for both of you, how have you seen employee engagement evolve? And then what unique challenges and opportunities does this new work environment present for maintaining high levels of engagement? Joe, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, yeah, maybe hopefully it's becoming less the question of the hour pretty soon here, but this is, of course, always the question of the hour. I'm actually quite curious to see, what is it, Jan 1, Amazon says 5 days a week in the office, just to see what that means, more in particular across the West Coast and the other tech companies. Well, of course, this, is evolving a lot post-COVID. I will say one thing wonderful is that I think, I don't like to say the word hybrid anymore. I like to say flexible. What I don't know, I know how old I am. You used to have to go to work and your spouse was at work and then the plumber came at 10 o'clock. And now what were you going to do? Because no one was there for the plumber or whatever. You're just stuck and you got to work to get out. But now you can say, hey, the plumber's coming. Do you mind if I work from home in the morning? And most places say fine, and they know you'll be productive. But that's a little different than hybrid. That's flexible. I think that same survey, we asked people about this, working with each other, engage, etc. And nearly half of them said most of them said 40% of their work is done better when they're with people, co-located, face-to-face, collaborative. So it can't be everybody at home, and it's not. But it was also interesting, I thought, in one kind of evolution probably to come is, most of them had no choice as to when, how, and where they worked with their teams. It was mandated to them, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it might be. It was, only a small group of them really figured out to the humanity. How do we as a human team engage most effectively? So I think, this will continue to evolve. I hope the flexibility part doesn't go away. I have 4 children and they're all in this age group, and it's so wonderful to have that flexibility. But I hope management doesn't, we'll see where the Amazon link, but just say, no, I want you here on Tuesday. That's it. That's just, maybe that's fine, but I don't know. I don't think then Monday and what, so I think this will continue to move. I think as much as it respects the individual, both, and the desire and the need to collaborate. And if they're saying half their time they should be collaborating, the idea of let me do whatever I want, whenever I want, doesn't fly either.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sunaina?
I think that's exactly right. All I'll do is build on it and say, balance is the name of the game, right? You want to ensure there is flexibility on offer, but there is no substitute for 3D energy. We all know that, right? When you meet someone in person, the energy and the charisma you feel, you want that as part of your working life as well. But, I am on the board of the Stanford Institute of Economic Policy Research, and we have a phenomenal professor there, Nicholas Bloom, who's written a lot of work, extensive research on hybrid working. And in fact, he published a great piece in Nature. You should all check it out. On 2 days working from home, increases productivity, right? Resignations down by 33%. And those folks who utilize that flexible working privileges, if they so have it for their company, are equally likely to get promoted as those who work full-time in the office. But here's the big but to our question of the hour: well-being is way up, right? Because people can use the time effectively to invest in themselves. And I think that's a magic trifecta, quadfecta, if you will, where you can have greater well-being, less attrition in your workplace, just as productive, if not more. And quite frankly, as the employee, you're just as likely to have opportunities to move up. You should absolutely have that as part of your dynamic. That 5-0, I think that's a return to the 5-0 model, as many banks have done, as many tech companies are now sort of threatening to do. We shall see if that what happens to these metrics for those.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think there are a few things that are valuable in this flexible work environment. One, if you think about professionals with disabilities or unseen illnesses, having that flexibility to work from home is very important. And, years ago, before COVID, right, we did not give folks that flexibility because we didn't think that they would be productive. But we saw in 2020 with COVID, people are productive from home. And I think it's been for my own team, and just a hello and a shout out to my amazing team, the flexibility that's provided allows them to, Joe, as you said, attend those personal things at home and go to those doctor's appointments. And, they're still at top level production and top level engagement with each other and collaboration. And so I think that flexible work model is ideal. I think that's so true. But you're right. There is an importance of being able to interact and collaborate. So whether your employees are working hybrid locally or they're remote, bringing them in, on a regular basis is important. Thank you for that. I know that's a struggle still for organizations. And how do we bring folks back? Do we bring them back full time? Do we bring them back half time? How do we continue to collaborate well? How do we continue to bring people in that are remote? And so that continues to be a struggle, I think, for leaders. So thank you for your insights on that. In your experience, Sunaina, what are the most significant challenges boards face when trying to govern across different cultural, legal, and regional landscapes in a global organization? And at a high level, how can we begin to address these challenges?
Yes, it all depends on which country's board you're on, right? There are certain countries where the requirement of the board is to solve for only one equation, and that is maximum shareholder value creation, full stop, the end. Okay, yep. Many US companies have that paradigm at the board level. In certain other countries, for example, I'm on the board of a German business. German law dictates that the chairman of the board solve for more than just shareholder value creation. They also solve for stakeholder value creation, which also means employee value creation. And you have employee engagement as part of that. It's in the law. I have a requirement to do so as chairman of the board of that business. Not just employees, but also suppliers and so forth. And it's a really interesting way to think about it. Now, many of my private equity colleagues would tell you, well, it's a real pain in the behind when I need to fire people in Germany or France because there are so many laws and when and so forth to consider. Yes, that's absolutely true. But for here, when we're talking about this topic of boards and leading with purpose and talking about workplace well-being, I think that's a powerful mindset shift, because I work in a US bank, and with the US paradigm, I'm solving for one thing only, and that's dollars and cents. By the charter of the business and charter of the law, that's what I'm trying to solve for. But when you change that and you force the board to say, hey, hang on, you must think about employees, you must think about suppliers, suddenly your aperture shifts from being very narrow to incredibly broad. That I've got to think about impact of decisions that I make as chairman of this board, as I run that board, as I talk to the CEO and the management company team there, about how those decisions impact way more than just shareholders. I think it's that shifting of the aperture and the lens is the invitation I'd have to board members anywhere in the world, that it's incredibly powerful when you do that and go, wow, I've got all of these other things to consider. I still have to make the best decision based on limited information, based on constrained resources, but at least I'm not thinking about the other people who are involved in this.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. It's so true. And, it's different depending on where you are in the world, and you have to be aware of that. And so that's so important. Thank you, Sunena. Joe, your book, The Generous Leader, which of course I have with me today. I'm going to be honest, Joe, I refer to this book very often. It emphasizes, I love it. It emphasizes the importance of generosity in leadership. Can you explain how this philosophy reshapes traditional leadership models, and what inspired you to adopt this approach in your own leadership journey?
Okay, I'm going to build on so much Sunena said too. We talk about great managers and then even greater leaders, or whatever. I'm going to say even greater. Well, you could be a bad leader, I guess. But, I think, first off, we have to remember, and I'm part of this, leaders still have to drive outcomes. If you don't get results, you ain't going to be in the job. Let me just put it very simply and directly. But it's interesting. Joaquin Duato, sorry, I've cited him twice, said to me, Joe, as a leader, of course, outcomes matter. He said, but the next part takes maturity. The sooner you understand that it's your job as a leader to connect with and unleash all the great human traits of your team, the sooner you'll get to the best outcomes. So I found it interesting when you were saying the German boards, the law mandates the boards think about stakeholder engagement and the employees thriving. Quite frankly, if you want to get the best results, which is just what the law seems to indicate, maybe not, you actually need to do that anyway. I think about it. If you're a leader, a new manager, or leader of 3 people, in BCG's world, you could do all the work yourself. You'd work all the time, you'd kill yourself, but you could do it. But the minute you've got 20 people or 50 people or you can't do it anymore. So now you have to be motivating and inspiring. And, to me, when I say generosity and leadership, what I really mean is that the leader gives of themselves without expectation of direct personal gain, so that others develop, grow, and thrive at their full potential. Now, of course, if they're doing that as a leader, you get personal gain because the business will be better, and look at you, you drove your business. And I think this is, now we're just going to go back again to what we were talking about. Sunena said, she said, so much of our human lives are in the workplace. I'd even go one step further, is probably what you meant. So much of our human lives are working. Tech, BlackBerry started the change, the phone continued it, and COVID finished it, that the whole work-life thing is blurred. So now we are bringing our human self to work, whatever that work, where that is, and we want to be seen, and we really expect our leaders to share some of their humanity, as you know. And, I think at the most core in that, to me, there's 2 things. This whole listen to learn, really ask questions, listen. What does someone know that I don't know? If I'm engaging them, they're feeling seen, they're more motivated. And then we haven't used the buzzwords yet, but I do believe this whole thing of being authentic. I mean, no one wants to follow a leader who is trying to set off a persona they're perfect or close to perfect. You need to see some humanity of them, in which case, some level of authenticity, which can be as simple as in a meeting. Oh, I don't know the answer. Should we all work? That's freeing to people. But a lot of leaders don't want to admit they don't know the answer. Scott Kirby was telling me during the head CEO United during COVID, he was going to tell everybody, hey, I'm not sure where this is going to go, not sure how long you'll be laid off. And his team said, you can't say that. You're the CEO. You're supposed to know. Now, in
Right.
COVID, you got to pass. But he said, what do you mean? I don't know and nobody knows. So, of course, I'm going to say that. And it was highly appreciated. So I think this, really a leader today has to drive results, does it through the people. It's by ensuring they thrive at their full potential. And, two of the most important traits to me are really engaging and listening and sharing some of your own humanity.
Absolutely. And Joe, I want to stay on that point for just a second, sharing your own humanity, because one of the things that leaders say, right, in the workplace is, oh, please bring your authentic self to work. But they have to model that first, right? They can't have that old school command and control. I have all the answers. I have it figured out kind of persona, and then expect your employees to come into the workplace and feel that permission to be themselves, to take a risk, to make a mistake. You have to model that as a leader. And I think that that's so important. And thank you for saying that, because I think that is the crux of the culture that we're trying to build starts with the leaders. I think that's so true.
We have time? Can I just build on that for 1 second? Because I
Yes.
know sometimes they will shoot. Does that mean I, as a 35-year-old Black female, have to cry in front of everybody? And if I do that, it doesn't mean you have to go that far across the line. You can be a leader in a room and say, I don't know. I'm actually leaving BCG the end of this year, believe it or not. And I just was at a dinner and someone said, well, Joe, one thing you always did is if your wife or your children called, no matter who was in the meeting, you picked up the phone. And now that's not quite vulnerable, but I was not going to not display, who knows, something might be wrong. And it wasn't all about work. So I think there's simple ways you can show your humanity. It's not, you don't have to go to the extreme, which many of us immediately think and then get stuck,
That's a good point, Joe, because you also, and thank you for using that example of a Black woman, because culturally diverse women or people that are underrepresented in the workplace, have a different experience. And so, where is your level of comfort and feeling of safety in that workplace to be able to be your full self? And what does that mean? And it doesn't have to be to the full extent necessarily if you're not in the place to feel safe, but it can be, right, picking up the phone for your children or for your spouse. And I think that's so important. Thank you for that. What metrics or indicators do you each consider most important when assessing employee engagement and its impact on the overall organizational performance? Sunaina, we'll start with you on this one.
There's a number of metrics you can use, and it really depends on the importance of engagement to your business, right? So you can test the temperature of how your employees are feeling about engagement, formally or informally. So formally, Raymond James will send out a survey, anonymous survey about how you're managed and how you're feeling in terms of health and well-being in the business. They'll do that formally every year, and every head of every group and department will get results from their workforce. So that's a metric, right? That's data that you can see directionally how people are feeling in your team. But some of those can be painful to fill out, often self-selected by those who are filling it out, and not everybody does. So you're not getting the perfect sample set, but data is always data. Data is always useful. So you take the formal input when you can. And by the way, you can do that via 360s. You can do that via all sorts of feedbacks sessions. One of the things that I employ in the business is if we are holding something that involves a number of employees, we'll do micro feedback, right? So we'll do feedback on the spot before you leave, fill it out, or the day after, here's 5 questions. It'll take less than 90 seconds of your time. Do it that way. So micro dosing of feedback is often you'll get much better uptake when you do it that way. But much more powerful for me is what you hear when you engage people with open-ended questions. Now, you need time for that. And not everybody has the time for these open-ended, tell me how you're feeling. Tell me how you're feeling about your job, or tell me how you're feeling about the role. And how do you see this part of the business evolving and what's changed over the last 6 months? How would you summarize that? Open-ended questions that really get someone talking. And that's when you hear the feel for the tempo, the morale, if you will, the energy that's in that group or in that cohort of people. For that, one person can't do it all, especially if you're managing dozens and dozens of people. It's not possible for one person who's doing anything other than a small handful to be able to have those engagement sessions. So for example, I'll do that with my senior cohort. There are about 18 of them globally. And I'll make sure I do that on a fairly routine basis, informally hearing what's happening in their worlds. But I have good management talent within my business who will do that with everybody else too. Now, you don't always want to be doing that every 2-3 weeks and having an hour-long conversation about how they're feeling. That's not the role of management either. So there is, again, back to the word balance, that you will do it a couple of times a year. And there'll be an open, safe space for them to share what's happening in their worlds and know that we will empathetically listen. We cannot implement, I tell them all, businesses are not democracies. It's not a vote. Just because you all want, a soda pop machine doesn't mean that we can get it. And it doesn't mean that it's part of the priority of the business. But will we listen to the arguments as to why? Yes, we always will.
Awesome. Joe?
Well, I probably repeated most of that. I think I just was thinking about this when I ran North America. The other thing that, of course, does matter is the attrition numbers. And the attrition numbers, as you break them down. I mean, we have surveys, and I used to look, I think important to people like their work. Do I find it interesting and rewarding? Some of these joy comments. Do I have the tools to do my job? But at the end of the day, we have networks like most organizations, Black, Latinx, women, veterans, etc. If, in all my efforts to enable people to feel that they belong and want to stay, it's going to be the attrition numbers. And there were some, like the veterans group, I could never crack. Essentially, the veterans and the Black were the toughest two. And I shouldn't say I'd never crack, but that was, at the end of the day, oh, wow, everyone's leaving the same percentage they did all along. Somehow we're not doing something to engage them and make them feel the enjoyment. So I agree with everything Sanina said, but I do think you can also look at those retention numbers or attrition numbers. They hold you damn accountable, like it or not,
Absolutely. And, both of you provided such great information there. And that's one of the things, Joe, that people often, or organizations often don't measure, is the attrition broken down by demographic.
Yeah. If you don't break it down.
Absolutely.
That's exactly right. And you don't know where you're having issues. And so that's so important. So as we begin to close, Joe and Sunaina, both of you are highly successful global leaders, and having engaged with you both individually, I discovered a practice that you both have in common: meditation. In recognition of World Mental Health Day, which was on October 10th, can we close our session by having you share a bit about your individual practices and why meditation is so important to your self-care? Joe, we'll start with you on this one.
Okay. Well, this came into my life maybe, 20 years ago when I went to one of these 10-day silent Vipassana retreats. If you've been to anyone on there, it's very intense, but it was very amazing. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, what it did more than anything is help me to get out of my own head. I mean, I'll just give one example. I don't like it when the dog barks. And I realized, wait, the dog's barks, it's my problem, not the dog's problem. I'd be mad at the dog. The dog the bark's over, it goes through the air, goes into my eardrum. It's at times elapsed by the time I process it as my anger. So it's all about my own head. So it's really, I'm less intense than the 10-day silent anymore, but calms and focuses the mind. You realize the little things just don't matter a whole lot. And you also learn that all things do change. Or you remember that, just, so this moment will be this moment, but the next moment isn't going to be. So those are some of then I will say, even in a busy work life now, one thing I learned there's, walking. I mean, you can meditate, you sit on an airplane for 3 hours, you can just sit back, it's not the same as being on the floor, but it's still stop and try to calm the mind. You can actually do it a lot of places.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Sunaina?
So you curate your audience well, Jackie. I am also a Vipassana meditator.
Oh, really?
Yes, Joe. I've been going to annual 10-day silent Vipassana meditation courses for 13 years straight. I just came back from my last one just about 2 weeks ago. and I meditate for an hour every day. Now, people go, "Oh, an hour. Where'd you find an hour?" Think about the amount of time you all spend on your screen time, folks. There's plenty of time in the day. Don't give me that. And I wake up first thing in the morning. I'm up very early. I have 3 young kids. But I have a golden hour. It's usually between 5:15 for an hour, and I'll get my first morning sitting in. And it has been a game changer. The only superpower that I've been able to develop is the ability to quieten my own mind. And I urge everybody listening to invest in ways of doing the same, right? If I used to get angry, upset, ecstatic, sad about something for 4 hours before I started meditating about a decade and a half ago. Now it's 2.5 hours. That's an hour and a half of liberation. I won myself. If you all would have been angry or sad or excited and jittery about something at an 8 out of 10 level, and because you have a meditation practice, that's now 7 out of 10 level, that's nearly a 17-18% difference in your symptoms. That's amazing. The ability to control your mind is the greatest power you will ever cultivate. And it's the ability to say, okay, I'm going to drop it now. And to tell your mind to do that, to take it away from destructive thoughts, from unconstructive places, and to focus it wherever you wish it to be. It is simply liberating. It's the best thing I've ever done for myself. And now I do it every day. It's one of the non-negotiables in my life. And I encourage anyone listening and everyone listening to invest in that for themselves.
Amazing. Thank you both. Joe, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that was inspiring.
Thank you both so much for participating in this special event and for sharing your expertise and insights and perspectives. Your voices are so important to this topic, and I've enjoyed the conversation so much. So thank you both. Thank you. And thank you all for attending this live streamed episode of Diversity Beyond the Checkbox. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. During the break, keep this link open to view workplace options videos on important offerings. The next session, Building a Psychologically Safe Workplace, is scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. That presentation will be delivered in English. For our international audience, we also have the same session in Spanish. Both links to join are posted in the chat for your convenience. Thank you for your time today. Thank you to my amazing guests, and goodbye, everyone.